My name is Stephen Ashley. As I said, I am currently the head of Offshore Energy 4.0 program at the Net Zero Technology Centre. And together with a number of organisations, we've been working on something called, as I said, this offshore energy digital and data strategy. So that sounds very grand, probably quite pompous, but I'll try and give you a very sort of high-level overview of what it's going to be and what you'd like to see in June. And the idea is really to get the industry to sort of work together and have a little bit of a strategy around how we manage data and how we drive digitalization. I'm just going to make a quick disclaimer a little bit just to say that actually anything I present here isn't actually finalized. It's largely finalized, so there is some high-level recommendations, so it could change. We're undergoing a sort of review session at the moment, so something might change, so please don't hold me accountable for that. Steve said when you read the report. Really, you know, what is the context of the background? So, you know, an integrated energy vision or future is a necessary vision. If we want to get to net zero by 2050, you know, the offshore energy aspect or sector is a fundamental component of the UK being able to do that. And it is an area in transition. So we have the traditional oil and gas, we have obviously massive growth, and we need massive growth in offshore wind. There's other renewables, so wind, tide, CCUS, hydrogen, all these things are being worked on. And, you know, it actually is a real challenge. It's a real challenge. There's a lot of money needs to be spent in infrastructure and building capability, but it's also a massive opportunity. And essentially under all of that, we need digital technologies, and the base foundation for any digital technology, of course, is data. Right? So we need to have a bit more of a joined up thinking around data. So, you know, the opportunity is there, we need to sort of take it. So a few people within the industry started to think about, well, okay, we need to start coordinating, we need to start thinking about this. Can we, as an industry, get together? Which is good anyway, because we need to start collaborating across what I would call different industries into one offshore energy sector. So the traditional sort of oil and gas, but with the renewables, and we also want to create ecosystems around the new technology, green technology, and all of that requires a sort of strategic approach, and you need to get everyone involved in that. So we started looking around, and I'm saying we, you know, there's people in the sort of digital data sort of space within the industry, and we were looking, and we were quite impressed by a Taskforce report. So there was an energy data Taskforce report that was set out and created by Energy System Catapult. It was, this was released 2 years ago now. Go and have a read of that if you haven't read it. It's really interesting. And this was looking at the downstream generator utility space in terms of how they use data. It's quite a well-recognized report, and it led to some really active, you know, projects going on, some funding from governments, the support of Ofgem and BEIS and others. And then they moved on to a digitalization task force, which again, they've issued a report that actually came out, I think it was January, so earlier this year. Again, it's really useful. It's not in the context of offshore energy, but it's in energy space, and I would encourage people to go and, you know, look at it. So what we wanted to do is, okay, can we take that sort of thinking, that approach, and apply it to offshore energy? So we approached Energy Systems Catapult to help us as an industry do that, and they agreed to do so, and with a bit of funding across the sector, we've managed to develop that project. I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. So who's involved? Obviously, this is just the people who, you know, the organizations. We have people from these organizations part of a steering committee, but There's a huge number of organizations and people being involved in the discussions around it. So we're very, obviously the Catapult, the Energy Systems Catapult, we're also working with Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, the regulators, Crown Estate, North Sea Transition, that doesn't come off my tongue yet, so North Sea Transition Authority, the TLB, all these people were involved. We've set up a steering committee, and we are working, chaired by Nick Granger, who's the Director of Corporate at the NSTA, and as I said, working with the Catapult, the Energy Systems Catapult, to deliver this. So what are some of the objectives? I do apologize, this is a bit sort of bullet point, death by bullet point, this presentation. It's been a while since I've created presentations, and it's a report, so it's quite hard to put into a bit more image-based things. But essentially some key objectives we wanted to do, we needed to work with a whole range of stakeholders. It's no good, the NZTC doing something, or oil and gas industry, or the renewable sector. We need to work together. So we understood that we needed to have a wide-ranging steering committee, and that we need to engage the industry in general. No one is starting from scratch, right? So there's also a lot of things have been going on within the industry already in various areas. And so we needed to build on existing work and understand the existing work. So a lot of the initial work was around understanding the current landscape. And we needed a sort of approach that, interviewed a wide various, so we did a lot of structured interviews, we did a lot of workshops, we did 3 or 4 workshops, and as I said, the ultimate objective is to deliver a report, or the deliverable is a report which will be due out in June. There will be a webinar where that's presented, so look out for that. So, I think, the offshore energy sector comprises of a huge mix of mature and developing technologies, industries, companies, regulators, so it's quite a complex space. And then when you start looking at data, that's also quite complex, right? So what we wanted to do is try and think about how we could work, develop a strategy that also takes into account that people want to develop capability, you want to have a commercial proposition, you want to be able to develop an ecosystem around technology. So it's not about structuring it, it's about creating an ecosystem, but within a framework. And we gave ourselves a mission to establish a modern, digitalized and integrated offshore energy sector. So integrated is one of the key components to this, one of the big things we were trying to look at. And again, if we're going to meet the future and deliver net zero, we have to be more digital. We need generators, operators, the supply chain, the big service companies, the regulators, all essentially to be on the same page. And essentially this is what we're trying to do with this report. There were some principles that I won't go through them all, but essentially, and I've also essentially met them. Data, talked about them already. Data sharing was one of the key components, and there was a big discussion and bit of work around data being open, and how open can we make data. And data sharing was seen as one of the big challenges for the industry. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And just to say, some of the piece of work we did was looking at data that you might see in the renewable sector, oil and gas sector, through the life cycle. And the opportunity here was to see where there is a big overlap. So they are different in nature, but actually they have a very similar sort of plan, build, operate, decommission type life cycle. And we wanted to look at, okay, so where is there a overlap? What is unique, what is overlap? And this was just a piece of work that we did. Again, it's still very high level, but you can see there is a lot of data that is potentially useful across both sectors. So this was just a piece of work that we're doing as part of the discovery phase. And so I just put it up there as an example of some of the things that we thought about. And I really wanted just to come over to the recommendations that were made. And there's essentially strategic recommendations. These are addressing areas of policy, regulation, tools, infrastructure, and digitalization. And then workstream, which workstream sort of 4 suggested workstream areas where we want to utilize data. So you're trying to look at developing projects and actions that are related to the utilization of data that would be of benefit to the industry. And again, we're trying to make it so that it's a benefit of individual companies, but it's also a benefit to industry. So the idea is that you can work in parallel. The industry, you could be working on something from a operational challenge, developing a service, but you could also, the industry could also be using the data essentially at the same time. So I'll go into these. So these are essentially the 7 recommendations that come out of the report for the industry. So there's a recommendation to industry. So I'll just go a little bit into detail for each of those. For each of these recommendations, there is a set of suggested actions. So these are the ones that are in the bullet points underneath. So there's recommendations at strategic level. There's the work stream recommendations, and under each one there is suggested actions to take place. So if you look at there under unifying data, so we've said data is a key platform on which you want to build and develop and collaborate around and build that integration. You need some basic data principles first. You need some way to understand what data is there and how do you access it. So the idea of implementing an offshore data catalog under delivering a common data toolkit, for instance, implement the data sharing fabric. If you want to come and ask me what a data sharing fabric is afterwards, then I'll try and explain it to you. So these are clear actions, and I'm not going to go through them all because I just wanted to give you a highlight, and there will be this report coming on. But there are some very structured, identified, focused things that we believe the industry needs to do to move forward under these higher level recommendations. And then if you start looking at the work stream recommendations, we have essentially the same thing. So enabling whole system planning. So, just to give you some of the thinking here, if we are going to be effective as to do the net zero with a grid that is becoming an energy grid, so the energy generation grid that is going to become far more complex, interactive, the actual demand, the generation capability in the offshore sector also needs to measure that. You need to have an ability to understand your whole system, and we currently don't do that. So clear recommendations, so how are we going to start dealing with that? And the idea for all these recommendations, the actions, we identify projects together as an industry, look for the funding from government, from regulators, from industry to deliver some of these projects ongoing basis. So the report itself doesn't do anything, it just highlights some areas that we think we should work on. And there are a lot of areas there. I'll just talk about emissions data for net zero. If we're going to deliver net zero, we need to be able to measure and understand our progress. We need to look at scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. These will become important. And we need to be able to do that at a level of granularity, for instance, that will be useful while we're going through that process. Okay, so just put my time. Okay. Yeah. So, some conclusions. So this is a really, as you can tell, a really high-level view of thing. I really just want to whet your appetite for being able to look at that report when it comes out, and then work with your organisation, work with the industry to see what this means for the industry. And we're going to discuss it a little bit with the panel after this. But some of the conclusions that this is my own sort of conclusions from being part of the process and reading the draft report. And I think it's fair to say there is a consensus across the industry and the whole offshore sector. The data sharing and utilization is pivotal to the success. And we know that and we can see that because there's been a lot of initiatives around in these areas. And sort of regulators, license bodies have also fairly well demonstrated leadership and forward thinking in their approach to data collection, where if you think back to where we were sort of 5-10 years ago in terms of how the regulators collect data, share data, and make that data available, I think we've really progressed. So how do we build on that momentum and then get industry very much involved? The industry themselves have already started many initiatives. So you think about things like the Open Subsurface Data Universe, Open Earth, all these things are things that are very useful, the industry is already working on. So how do we pull all these things together? But the challenge is now to realize that the opportunities, benefits can be achieved through an aligned and collaborative approach, with some sort of strategic thought to it. And the idea is that the value derived from better data collection, sharing, provision, making data available, the utilization of that data will exceed some of its parts, and that's where we're really going to see some value and efficiency in the industry. So the strategic recommendations seek to address a lot of the challenges and opportunities across 3 distinct areas, which I mentioned: policy, regulation, tools, and digital infrastructure and digitalization. The workstream recommendations set out 4 areas where further projects and initiatives could be established to progress data utilization. And, I would say that, the offshore energy sector has set ambitious targets for itself regarding growth and for mitigating carbon, and for decarbonization. And that by itself will be a significant part of the overall UK target. So whether or not we're successful as a sector in achieving these aims will be part down to our ability to mobilize around some of these opportunities and embed a modern approach to data strategy at the heart of business operations. And very briefly, I just want to mention, so what is NZTC doing to try and do that? And then we just want to highlight 3 projects here, and they sort of really tie into the data sharing, the data catalog, data sharing fabric area. So OEDA, so Offshore Energy Digital Architecture. This has been funded by the Scottish Government. It's about to kick off. We're really looking for people to take part. So get in touch if you want to get involved in this. And this is where we really are trying to look at creating a data catalog and potentially a data hub where you can stream data. We rather pompously decided it was going to be the Spotify for offshore energy data. It's a bit marketing, but that's the concept. You can find data and then understand how you can access it, whether it's open or behind some sort of paywall. Projecting Success is a project where we're looking at something called a data trust, which is one mechanism for sharing data between parties that allows algorithms and data analytics to work without necessarily showing the other parties your data specifically. So it's to try and test the capability of data trust to support data sharing of sensitive data. And the last one I mentioned is Alto, which is looking at the really ramping up the use of robotics within the sector. This is something we're doing together with the ORE. And again, we're using data trust to try and share some of the payload data and the sort of the system data that we collect as part of that project. And these are new projects. So we're looking at how we can tie these projects back to the recommendations in the report, and we're always looking for more. And I think that's it. I just acknowledge that all the people in the steering committee, and we really have had real big engagement. 700 people and organizations have been part of the workshops and the interviews and everything else. So it's been a big opportunity, and the review session that I'm going on has taken quite a while because we have so many stakeholders, as you can imagine. And the 3 gentlemen there from the Energy System Catapult who did a really good job of pulling everything together as a report, which you will see in the future. Okay, so if you've got any questions, I think could you hold it? We're going to have a bit of a panel session.